It's a good, tight little house. We've never really had any problems. I'm sure you guys will enjoy this.
A New York homebuyer gets more than he bargained for when a house inspection turns up a mummified corpse. For decades, the crime had gone undiscovered, the victim unmissed, and the killer unpunished.
Look at this.
Now, investigators face a double mystery: identifying the victim and finding the murderer. In a rural Indiana hospital, a sudden soaring death rate raises critical questions about one of the nurses. It appears a poisoner has joined the staff, but the proof is scant, and building the case will require intensive care. When faith is misplaced, the result can be murder, leading investigators to solve another case of broken trust. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. Nassau County, New York, on Long Island, is home to almost 1.5 million people. It's close enough to enjoy the benefits of New York City while maintaining a quiet, suburban lifestyle.
Yeah, you can see. No water damage.
In the fall of 1999, a new resident made the final walkthrough of the house he was about to purchase. The solid, old structure had weathered more than 50 New York winters. Within its walls, a half-century of history had passed. Some stayed behind. Tucked in the crawl space, a 55-gallon drum sealed tight. According to the seller, it had always been there, too heavy to move. The homeowner assumed it was filled with construction debris. The buyer wanted it gone.
I tried to move it a couple of times. It's a heavy sucker.
That's gotta go. You can't stay there.
Together, they managed to move it to the curb. But the trash collector refused to take it. Its weight exceeded the limit. Hoping to divide the load, the owner attempted to pry off the lid. Rust had made it almost impossible. Finally, he managed to breach the seal. The stench was staggering and unmistakable. Inside was a withered hand. The owner rushed to call the police.
Mass Police Emergency Operative 475.
He'd only caught a glimpse, but that was all he needed. Detectives Brian Parpan and Robert Edwards arrived, along with crime techs. The owner described the situation. Detective Parpan took it from there.
The first impression was an overwhelming odor when we opened the barrel. Inside the barrel, we could see a hand that certainly appeared to be human. The barrel itself and the information that we had initially at the scene, we thought we were looking at something probably about 18 to 20 years old.
Before the barrel was moved, Detective Parpan ordered it thoroughly photographed, inside and out.
Ooh, thanks.
Detective Robert Edwards devised his strategy.
We closed the barrel up at that time and decided that we were going to take the whole package to the medical examiner's office, where we could do a very in-depth investigation. You know, this is a little unusual. You come to somebody's house, a new owner is coming in to take over, and he looks in a crawl space and he finds a 55-gallon drum. We eventually find out that there's a body in it. Now we want to make sure there's nothing buried in the area around the house before we give it up.
When they could find no evidence of any other bodies around the house, the investigation shifted to the medical examiner's office.
We can put the others.
Investigators processed the contents of the barrel. Their most puzzling find, handfuls of granules or pellets.
I thought it was some kind
The detectives had no clue what they were made of or what they were used for.
pelletized plastic or something.
They tagged some to send to the lab. Next, green liquid.
Put this in the bag.
Again, its chemical composition and relevance remained a mystery. At least for now. Further digging put the homicide detectives into more familiar territory. A small purse emerged from the depths, its soaking wet contents practically disintegrating. Still, maybe it held a clue.
Can you get at it?
Yes.
And then, the victim. Mummified in the airless, waterlogged tomb. Hiding a secret for so many years. The body concealed more peculiar objects underneath.
We'll save them in there.
The single stem of a plastic
I'm
flower,
not sure what this is.
Plastic.
a locket with an inscription,
Can you see it? You know?
to Patrice from Uncle Phil, suggesting the victim was female. Some more liquid and some sediment,
Jewelry in here.
and among the sediment, 2 gold rings, one with the initials MHR inscribed inside.
For that, the jewelry could certainly be important. We have a name, Patrice. We have a second name, Uncle Phil. So this gives us some background that we can search and try to find out who we're dealing with, who the victim is.
But the most obvious clue was perhaps the barrel itself.
Look at this. There's got some kind of identification on the bottom of it. We didn't see it before because it hasn't been over. Perhaps you want to get a photograph of that?
Okay.
Upended, it revealed letters stenciled and embossed into it, and the fragment of a sticker or logo suggested it once served a more legitimate purpose. The authorities would follow up on it. But first, the victim had to be freed.
Removing the remains from the barrel, it was quite laborious. It took quite a long time. It was done very, very slowly. The material that was in the barrel, eventually we learned was to weight it down, was removed ladle by ladle. It was separated. It was put aside for our lab to be tested. And then actually removing the body was done very, very carefully so as not to cause any additional damage.
The remains were sent to the medical lab.
Let's see what we got here.
Detective Parpan and his team turned their attention to an address book pulled from the victim's purse.
Oh, this is completely saturated. Socks, can you get a picture of that, please?
The liquid had reduced the pages to little more than pulp.
Let me flip it for you.
As a clue,
Can you get
it
it?
didn't look
Yeah.
promising.
Try not to tear it.
But
Oh,
a
it's got a
business
name.
card
Can we
tucked
double
inside the handbag showed a little more
Doctor's name.
potential.
Be careful with that. It's fragile.
It came from a physician in Union City, New Jersey.
Well, that's really...
Down the hall, the victim herself underwent an examination. Her mummified body was carefully measured. Even though time had shrunk her remains, her bones revealed her approximate living height, about 4'9". Her bone structure indicated she was probably in her late 20s and possibly of Hispanic descent. As part of her autopsy, she was x-rayed.
See that bridge work?
The films revealed she suffered a massive head injury.
Skull fractures.
They displayed unusual gold bridgework in her mouth,
Such a nice headshot.
and they exposed a great deal more. She was pregnant.
Near-term pregnancy. Look at that.
The cause of death here was somewhat obvious in the blunt trauma to the head. The pregnancy, which was a shock to everybody, gave us probably in our own minds an initial motive that we'd be dealing with someone this far along in their pregnancy.
Investigators turned their attention to the dental work, which appeared to have been made outside of the United
It's
States.
just skip like that, isn't it?
the additional things that came out of the autopsy, and the forensic odontologist informed us of the dentistry, the unusual type of dental activity that was there, so we were dealing with someone from another country. So we were able to pretty much come up with a race, an age, and the fact that this person was obviously a homicide victim, but a pregnant homicide victim.
The autopsy told investigators much about the victim, but not the most crucial thing: who she was. After all this time, flesh still remained on her fingers. An outside chance her prints could be raised. According to standard procedure, some fingers were amputated and sent to Detective Charles Costello.
I was advised I was going to be getting fingers from the individual in the drum, and I didn't know what to expect as far as condition of the skin, the tissue, the body of the tissue of the fingers that I would receive.
Though still flexible, the shriveled fingers didn't lend themselves to ordinary ink rolling. To eliminate the wrinkles and expose the ridge detail, Costello used a hypodermic to inflate the tips with air. But the skin deflated too quickly. Costello revised his plan.
What I did, I took twine and devised a tourniquet. Put a tourniquet around the second digit of the finger. Same way you would stop the blood, I was trying to stop the air from leaking out of the finger. I tied it off as tight as I could. I again attempted with the hypodermic needle. Was successful in getting it to inflate and stay inflated.
He rolled and printed the finger. And after all that, a search of the New York State and FBI fingerprint archives revealed no matches. It's been said that you can tell a person by the company she keeps, and that is what investigators were counting on. The victim's address book, saturated and almost useless, provided the last desperate chance to find her identity. Most pages were stuck together, too fragile to move, too faded to read. Forensic document examiner Joan Furtner began to gently pry the loose pages apart. The process could not be rushed. As each page dried, Furtner separated it and returned the address book to the drying chamber.
What I had to do was take the evidence and I had to put it into a forensic drying cabinet, which helps to draw out the moisture, and that helps the paper fibers in the paper to become stronger so I can manipulate the pages better.
Detectives already had one address to follow up, from the physician's business card in the victim's purse.
Union City. No good. Non-working number.
The number had been disconnected.
Let's check the book.
The book on Jersey?
Got the Jersey book right here. Must have known we need it. It's right on top.
A New Jersey phone book provided a physician of the same name at a different address. Detectives were dispatched.
Yes, we'd like to talk about...
They learned the doctor had long since passed away.
Do you mind coming with me? I can answer your questions on...
His daughter had taken over the practice, but had only kept records for 5 years.
I'm not sure if I'd be able to help you.
Even if the victim had once been a patient 20 years ago. Today, it was as if she had never existed. And that meant that someone had gotten away with murder. In New York, detectives Brian Parpan and Robert Edwards chased a phantom. An unnamed, pregnant woman killed decades ago by an unknown assailant. They had a locket to Patrice, love, Uncle Phil.
We have a doctor's name.
And they had her ring with the initials MHR. It was not much help.
Everybody's trying to come up with what that...
Detectives notified the missing persons squad, providing only a first name and asking them to go back in their database to 1980.
Nothing at that time had been computerized, so we had people come in, begin to search, do a hand search of the records. We're looking at an area of well over 5 or 6 million people, and a lot of people go missing in that period of time.
Bob, there's nothing here. I can't do anything.
Another dead end.
Not doing anything for us.
Yeah,
In the Nassau County Criminalist section, detectives like Charles Conti took a different approach, focusing on the mysterious pellets found in the barrel.
We are trying to determine a possible origin of the pellets themselves, or in this particular case, it might be related to the barrel in which they were found in.
The pellets burned, giving off the unmistakable smell of plastic. A chemical analysis determined they were polystyrene, used to manufacture common household objects.
If we can trace back an origin, we might be able to link that to a possible suspect who might have been in contact with the deceased.
Oh, can I speak to someone in manufacturing?
On the theory that the industrial pellets and the industrial barrel were linked, Detective Parpan followed a lead.
Detective Parpan from Nassau County Homicide Squad.
He was happy to find out they were still doing business.
And we were able to contact them. By telling them the stenciling and the numbers that we had on the barrel, they were able to inform us that that particular barrel was manufactured in March of 1963. And that barrel, because it had a sticker on it, would have been sent to a chemical company.
That company closed in 1970, but was acquired by another one. The detectives traced the lead to the new company. The quality assurance manager checked the lot number.
What's in these barrels?
He determined the barrel carried a green liquid dye that stopped being manufactured in 1970. The same green liquid that immersed the victim.
What are we doing,
Finally,
Brian?
the investigators felt they were making progress.
Just trying to get some information down here, Bobby, so we can try to get a handle on it.
They now had a timeline for the murder. Between 1963, when the barrel was manufactured, and 1970, when the dye stopped being made.
Present to back.
Present to back. All right.
But the building permits indicated the crawl space wasn't dug until the 1980s.
Okay.
So the murder had to have occurred after that date.
290.
Investigators wanted to talk to the homeowners who built the addition.
72.
Because of where it was found, it's found under a house. So we're looking at something that we feel is a short list of suspects.
72.
Our initial thoughts was, who built this extension? You don't expect someone in a house to leave something like this there. You would expect someone who had a chance to be there undetected might put it there. We knew it was going to present a problem.
And these people.
Yeah, get you something to drink.
According to records from City Hall, the extension was built in 1984, creating the crawl space where the barrel was found. Investigators paid a call on the owners of the house at that time.
1972.
They'd purchased it in 1971.
The extension was already there.
It was completed, yeah.
But they had surprising news.
They informed us that the extension was already there, and that it wasn't until they sold the house that a certificate of occupancy was actually signed and filed. The family you purchased it from.
The crawl space existed years before there was any official record of it, muddying the trail, but not for long.
Flower business, plastic flowers? Plastic flowers? Yeah, yeah.
They also informed us that the people that they purchased the house from, that he was an owner of a plastic flower company.
As the detectives inched closer to the possible identity of the killer, forensic document examiner Joan Fertner shed light on the victim. Some of the pages from the address book had dried enough to read. But after decades bathed in liquid dye and body fluids, most entries were no longer legible. Fertner used an alternate light source to decipher the faded writing.
The video spectral comparator is an instrument that's hooked up to a computer monitor, and there are a series of cameras and filters and light sources that allow you to see from the ultraviolet to the infrared range of the spectrum. And it allows you to see outside of the range that the eyes normally can see.
Among the first things the apparatus revealed were the name, address, and resident alien number of the book's owner, the female victim.
I knew we had hit pay dirt, and that this was something significant.
The investigators knew it too. Parpan and Edwards received the immigration records and a photo of the victim, Angelica Marroquín, born in El Salvador in 1941, immigrated to the U.S. in 1966, and dead before the decade was out. She came to the U.S. to work as a nanny, then began working at a plastic flower company.
Based on the work that we did in the city to get information on Melrose Flower, we were able to identify who the owners of Melrose Flower were.
I'll be glad to hang on.
The company had two owners. One of them, Howard Elkins, also owned the house at the time the addition and crawl space were constructed.
We had spoken with all the other owners in the house. Mr. Elkins was the only one who was out of state.
Howard Elkins, the homeowner when the crawl space was dug, had become the prime suspect in the murder of Angelica Marroquín.
We're going to check this whole area.
But the gap between suspicion and final justice can loom large. And investigators still had miles to go. Investigators had given a name and a face to an anonymous murder victim. Now they followed the trail of her killer. Before confronting their prime suspect, Howard Elkins, New York detectives Brian Parpan and Robert Edwards traveled to Florida to speak with his former business partner. He recognized photos of the barrel and said the company used to receive dye in them.
Matter of fact,
And it contained
Then,
dyes.
Detective Parpan asked him about Howard Elkins.
And now that in itself was not unusual. He was aware that Mr. Elkins had had an affair while he was working at Melrose Plastic and Flower Company. He had no information on it, but he knew that he had an affair, and he also knew that Mr. Elkins' wife and father-in-law had found out about it.
The affair was with one of the employees, a petite Hispanic woman with long dark hair and gold bridgework.
What do you mean gone?
He didn't know much about her.
never just showed up for work.
One day, she stopped coming to work.
Well, ladies that come for work for...
He recalled that a short time after the woman stopped coming to work, he took a phone message for Howard Elkins.
My former partner, so... I don't
It was a landlord in Hoboken, New Jersey.
No, I don't really care what
He wanted to know if Mr. Elkins wanted to keep the apartment. The woman no longer lived there.
Company, and he showed up...
The partner gave the message to Elkins, and the next day saw him come to work with his car filled with boxes and a television set. The detectives were now absolutely convinced Elkins was their man.
The description that the business partner gives of this particular person, even though we're dealing with a mummified body, is exactly what we're looking at when we remove the body from the barrel.
Have a seat.
Armed with the information, but revealing none of it, the investigator spoke with Howard Elkins himself.
But did you ever have an affair? Were you with anybody?
He invited us in, and it was almost like a game. He knew we knew, we knew he knew, we knew. He was trying to find out information from us, and we were trying to find out information from him.
But he gave up nothing. Elkins denied he'd ever seen that type of barrel.
Construction jobs, workers, and I'm sorry, I know nothing about those. Mr. Elkins, you're going to tell us you've never seen a barrel like that before.
He remained poised and indifferent.
And we believe you're involved.
The investigators wouldn't relent.
I know where that barrel came from. I know where it's manufactured.
We didn't pussyfoot with him at all. I mean, we told him that, as far as we're concerned, you killed this girl.
Excuse me, gentlemen, I have a call. Hello?
His wife phoned.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I can't talk now.
Elkins spoke with her for a few moments, then asked the detectives to leave.
General, I'm sorry. I really have nothing else to say. I can't talk anymore. I'd appreciate it if you'd leave right now.
They asked him to provide a DNA sample,
My home. I have nothing to say.
but he declined.
I'll tell you what. We're going to leave. We're going to leave because you asked us to. But we're coming back.
I stood right in front of him, and I said, Mr. Elkins, we're leaving. I want you to know something. We're going to get a court order. I'm going to get a court order for your blood. I'm going to match your blood up to the dead baby and that dead woman. And we're going to come back, we're going to put you in jail for the rest of your life.
You understand that, Mr. Elkin? You have a good day now, and we'll be back.
But that was the last time Detective Parpan saw Howard Elkins.
The next day, we attempted to get the warrants, and they were slow coming. That evening, we were notified, we were called to see if we had him in our custody. Apparently, his wife was looking for him.
He turned up the next day. His dark secret, kept hidden for 30 years, had finally destroyed him. The investigation continued. The medical examiner extracted a blood sample. The DNA was compared to the unborn child Angelica Marroquín carried. The baby was his. Work on the address book continued. Names and phone numbers were revealed. After 30 years, none worked, except one.
Yes, hi, this is Joni.
What we're doing is we're conducting an
Angelica's
investigation
friend had wondered about her all this
An
time.
incident that happened on Long Island.
When was this?
Well, it's just recent.
She told investigators she thought the young woman had returned to her family and was shocked to learn how her story had ended.
In a phone book that we're interested in.
She provided the detectives with the missing chapters.
How it appeared there and what you may know.
After losing touch with Angelica some years ago, the woman received a call from her. She said she was having an affair with her boss, but it was going well.
He's my angel. Every single night.
He rented an apartment for her and was going to leave his wife.
Now what happened to her?
But a few months later, it began to sour.
Back to her country.
Sorry.
I don't know what to do. I think
Angelica
he's gonna
told her
hurt
friend
me.
she was pregnant,
He might even
and her
kill
boss
me.
refused to
I don't
leave
know
his
what
wife.
to do. What to
Angelica had told his wife about the affair, and her boss threatened her life. Her friend said Angelica sounded panicked when she called.
I didn't know what happened.
She asked her friend to come over.
Then I got a phone call.
Angelica!
And when she arrived at the apartment,
Angelica!
there was nobody there. The door was open.
Angelica!
The table was set for lunch. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of a fight. But Angel was not there. She waited for a period of time, and then she went to the local police.
Yes.
It was too soon to file a missing persons report.
He was married.
That was the last anyone had seen of Angelica Marroquín.
But you know, she said he treated her so well.
Investigators surmised between the time the friend spoke to Angelica on the phone and the time she arrived at the apartment, Elkins had shown up and ended her life. Killers often turn against those they love, leaving behind traces of their callous ways. Others prey upon those who empower them with blind trust. Clinton, Indiana, a small town of 5,000 people. But in 1995, that number started declining, suspiciously. The local hospital served the health needs of the residents of Clinton. The sick came here expecting to get better, and most of them did. In 1994, after a sudden stomach ailment, Ethel Roja was recovering beautifully.
I'm doing very well.
Oh, sure. Glad to see you feeling better.
Her husband, John, could finally relax.
Bring us out, 'cause I have
Ethel would be coming home soon.
Things were going real good in intensive care. Doctor's report was good. Then I went to the cafeteria to get a bite to eat and a cup of coffee. I would say that about 15 or 20 minutes later, I came back, and the picture there was totally opposite the way I left her.
When Roja returned, White was in cardiac arrest. No one could explain why this woman on the verge of recovery would suddenly suffer heart failure. To doctors, it was a mystery.
My wife never was treated for heart disease. Never. She had no medical record of anything along the heart disease line. Never took any kind of medication or nothing.
Well, three cc's of epi. All right, flat line still, doctor.
Okay.
We have the full
Ethel Roja was dead.
We've given her 3
The official
cc's.
cause of death was acute heart failure.
We're just gonna have to call it.
Ethel Roja wasn't the only one. Over the next year, the number of deaths at the county hospital's ICU continued to rise dramatically. Something about these sudden and mysterious deaths didn't seem right. The nursing staff grew suspicious.
Let's call it 137.
Hoping to find some explanation for the sudden rise in deaths, the supervising nurse reviewed her staff logbooks over the course of the previous years. Some disturbing patterns emerged. Between 1993 and 1994, the death rate more than tripled from the previous years. In those 2 years, they recorded 102 deaths. Many were elderly, but a troubling fact emerged. Nearly all were improving before their sudden demise. After reviewing all the charts, the nurse could find only one similarity. In a large percentage of the deaths, one particular nurse was on duty. The data suggested a chilling scenario. She took the information to the hospital administrator, hoping she'd overlooked something that could explain away her suspicions. But the numbers didn't lie. They had to face the possibility that a member of the hospital staff might be a killer. Patients at a small Indiana hospital were dying at an alarming rate. And it looked like their deaths were no accident.
Just check the heart one more time.
The awful realization climbed up the chain of command at the county hospital. They called Indiana State Police investigator Frank Turchi.
Detective Turchi. In March of 1995, I was contacted by the chief of police in Clinton, who had been contacted by the hospital attorney. Before we had our first meeting, we had talked to each other about what it could possibly be, and obviously your first thought is theft of drugs, something like that. You don't think of a murder investigation. That was probably the last thing on our mind.
Investigators met with the hospital administrators. They told him the accusation centered on one nurse named Orville Lynn Majors.
All indications are...
At the time, all the hospital staff had to go on were their suspicions.
I'm not sure what it means exactly.
Since they had no proof of murder, they couldn't even give Turchi the name of a single victim.
In a normal investigation, you want to try to find out who did it. Like it's a whodunit type thing. But in this case, it was totally in reverse. I felt like we had a very good suspect, but we had to figure out who he killed and how he killed them.
Turchi requested a meeting with the nurse, Orville Lynn Majors. He wanted to talk with him before the hospital tipped him off he was under investigation. Turchi was too late.
They had suspended him, and that he had already had a lawyer contact them, so we knew that it was going to be very difficult. That was probably the first stumbling point in the investigation.
The next stumbling point was the mountains of technical data Turchi and his colleagues had to collate. If hospital patients were being murdered, then the proof was buried somewhere in this mountain of records.
There were shorthand type nurses' notes that meant something to them. To us, it meant absolutely nothing. So we had to be totally educated on medical terminology and deciphering medical records.
At this crucial preliminary phase of the investigation, every detail mattered, whether it pertained to Orville Lynn Majors or not.
He was either going to be a suspect or he wasn't. But at the beginning, he looked like a pretty good suspect. But we wanted to be very open-minded with that, and I wanted to, it was very important to me that we eliminate any possibility other than him.
Word of the investigation leaked to the media. Turchi feared the publicity would hurt the investigation. But the angel of death stories offered a mixed blessing.
It made people aware that something had happened, possibly, and these people began contacting all their local law enforcement agencies saying, you know, when my wife or mother or husband, grandmother, whoever it was, died in that intensive care unit, we saw something that at the time we thought looked odd, maybe suspicious, but the last thing you think of is that nurse caring for your family member is killing them.
Okay, so we talked a little bit on the phone.
Turchi followed up on the messages he received from people who had lost loved ones at the hospital. A woman recalled Nurse Orville Majors injecting something into her mother's IV immediately before she died.
Before it was her medication.
The woman's death fit the pattern. The patient's health was improving up until the point she suffered cardiac arrest.
He started to leave the room.
Over and over again, investigators kept hearing similar stories of mysterious injections with fatal results.
That's what got the case off and running, full speed, and at that point in time, we knew as investigators we had a real serious problem going on, and most likely a homicide investigation.
The case seemed to be growing larger each day. Turchi developed a database to organize the massive amount of information he collected. To prove Orville Majors was killing people, he first had to prove the alleged victims had died unnatural deaths. For the investigation to succeed, he had to determine the most likely victims of foul play. To help decipher the medical records, Turchi assembled a team of specialists, including Dr. Michael Ollinger, an expert in emergency medical care. He compared the suspicious deaths against the records of patients who died under less questionable circumstances. The suspicious deaths stood out. In each case, death suddenly struck a recovering patient.
We were, in fact, becoming medical detectives. We were looking at these cases, trying to determine, was this an unnatural or unexpected type of an event?
Investigators continued their fact-finding. They sought to gather all they could about Orville Majors and any other potential suspects.
So we interviewed nurses, doctors, healthcare people from every facet of the hospital, nutritionists, janitorial people, anyone that could have gotten in that intensive care unit, and either look at them as possible suspects or totally eliminate them.
But it always came back to Majors. One nurse reported seeing him inject a patient who died almost instantly. Dr. Ollinger instructed the investigators to chart the deaths based on their level of suspicion. They needed to link Majors to each death. Turchi took the most suspicious cases to Special Deputy Prosecutor Greg Carter. Carter remained unconvinced.
I know there are a lot of variables at work there, and that in order to charge and convict someone of a criminal act, you have to prove them guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So the associations or patterns in and of themselves didn't really cause me to leap to any conclusions. That's a real problem. I mean, this hospital had virtually no record keeping.
In order to bring criminal charges against Orville Lynn Majors, the prosecutor required some forensic proof of poisoning.
We knew that if we could find a toxin in the autopsy, that would be a very huge step in coming up with a smoking gun, but that in itself wouldn't necessarily be the smoking gun. We knew that we had to somehow link that toxin to our suspect.
What do you know anything else? Do you know any
First things first. Turchi had to find the toxin, and that meant exhumation. Turchi began the delicate job of asking survivors for permission to dig up their loved ones for autopsy.
I should say that we're going to have to exhume her body and do an autopsy.
If the evidence existed, it was buried with the victims.
We will stay in contact. It was a very difficult time for them, obviously, and for us also. I think that the families that the investigators dealt with knew that they were doing the very best they could to try to solve this case and find out why their family member died.
Finally, the autopsies commenced. The medical examiner looked for a variety of toxins and found absolutely nothing.
When they did the first 2 or 3 autopsies and they never came up with an obvious cause of death or a toxin, we were disappointed. Then it became apparent to us that it was unusual in the fact that they were finding no obvious cause of death.
It was a new way to think about the case. The fact that nothing suspicious was found provided grounds for suspicion. In fact, it could be their biggest clue so far. Dr. Ollinger examined the EKG readings from the deceased patients to find a common pattern.
Pattern that we recognized was many of these patients that died, they would die from a sudden loss of heart activity. Their heart would be beating fine, and all of a sudden, over a matter of less than a minute, they would get a widening of their heart rhythm and then just flatline.
Dr. Ollinger reasoned whatever substance caused patients to die like that must also occur naturally in the body. That is why it wouldn't stand out in the autopsy. It would let the killer pass unnoticed. It would be the perfect poison. In Indiana, hospital patients were dying mysteriously. Investigators suspected poison. The medical investigators researched toxins that would kill quickly and leave no trace. Dr. Michael Ollinger knew of a compound that would work like that: potassium chloride.
Potassium chloride could kill a healthy person, and so it wasn't unexpected that if potassium chloride was given to these patients, it would result in the types of deaths that we were seeing, which was a sudden loss of electrical activity of the heart.
To test his theory and build the case, Ollinger suggested investigator Turchi bring a toxicologist and a heart specialist aboard. He brought in medical toxicologist Dr. Brent Furby to lend his expertise. Because potassium is present in healthy bodies, if it's used as a poison, it would be difficult to prove.
When people die, within a few hours, usually their potassium goes up considerably. It may even triple. So determining that someone has been injected with potassium in a patient post-mortem, particularly if they've been exhumed, is really, really tough. In fact, I think it's virtually impossible.
The healthy heart uses potassium to control its rhythm. Too much potassium overwhelms the organ, causing it simply to stop. And though the presence of post-mortem potassium would prove nothing, a victim of potassium poisoning would show telltale signs of the toxin. Cardiologist Eric Pristowski was brought in to look for them.
Potassium is sort of the kingpin of the cell membrane. Potassium in the right concentration allows normal flow of electricity in a cell. If you suddenly give a very large amount of potassium that gets to the heart very quickly, what you do is you affect the heart's membrane so they cannot have electricity flow. And when that happens, the heart stops.
Do you carry this drug?
Not only is potassium stealthy,
Yes.
it was also easy to obtain.
Yes, we
Detectives found that a nurse could take a vial of potassium chloride from the hospital supply without anyone noticing it missing.
This is where you keep the
A
drugs.
vial of potassium chloride would provide the smoking gun investigator Frank Turchi desperately needed.
I obviously wanted a search warrant early for Lynn Majors' property, and we just couldn't put it all together. The information we had received that would give us suspicion as to what he was doing was events that had happened 2 years prior to our investigation. So obviously it didn't allow us the time frame in order to get a search warrant.
Turchi tried to question Majors, but his lawyer would not allow his client to provide specific answers.
Thank you.
The case was in danger of stalling. Greg Carter and Frank Turchi needed stronger evidence to get search warrants for Majors' home.
Presence of a substance which might... I understand that you and Lynn are roommates, is that correct?
They contacted
Yes.
Majors' housemate.
He moved into my house and...
At first, he was suspicious and reluctant to talk with authorities.
As to Lynn's
But eventually,
involvement?
they won his trust. He owned the house that he and Majors lived in. He told investigators that one day, as he was straightening up the garage, he came across some vials of potassium chloride. Here, at last, was the elusive smoking gun.
Be willing to sign that?
The housemate gave police permission to search his home.
This is one that we've prepared.
More vials were found on the premises. One thing led to another, and the discovery enabled investigators to get a warrant to search Majors' van. More vials turned up. They were processed as evidence.
Hey, Frank?
Now that they had linked Majors to potassium chloride, they had to rule out any other possible causes of death. Many of the patients died of heart disease. But now that poisoning was suspected, cardiologist Bruce Waller was called in to autopsy the hearts to find evidence of that disease.
I would look for blockages in the arteries, look to see if there has been heart attack, and examine the remaining valves and other aspects of the heart. If the heart were completely normal, then we would be suspicious of some other toxin as the cause of death.
The hearts were healthy. The suspicions were confirmed. Investigators had gathered enough evidence to arrest Orville Lynn Majors on suspicion of murder.
The evidence concluded that Lynn Majors was taking a patient in the intensive care unit, developing the opportunity for him to be alone with that patient, injecting the potassium chloride into the patient, causing their death, and doing it to make it look medically like this person took a turn for the worse and died.
The investigation took nearly 4 years, but in the end, it paid off. Orville Lynn Majors was convicted and sentenced to 360 years in prison. There is no deceit colder than a trust that is betrayed. When that betrayal turns deadly, police turn to forensic science to avenge the victims of broken trust.